The first topic of today is about 5G and also a little bit behind the hype, so to say. So we will have Martin Whitlock on stage from Telenor Connexion, but also Johansson from Ericsson, in order to give a full view on 5G behind the hype. So let's kick this off, starting with Martin Whitlock. Welcome on stage.
Thank you very much. My name is Martin Whitlock, as has been said. I'm the CTO of Telenor Connexion, or Telenor IoT, if you like. And here to speak about 5G behind the bus. What is it about? And 5G, as you probably understand, is the big thing in innovation in our industry these days. And talking about innovation, let us listen to what the old philosopher Schopenhauer had to say about it. Truth has to pass through 3 stages. First, it's ridiculed, laughed at. Then it's highly opposed, can never be done. And then it's self-evident, always been here. So a little bit like that, we can look upon the stages of our industry as well, I think. But before that, let me give you an example. 40 years ago, I was a young boy, and I was watching TV, and it was this fantastic show, Knight Rider, where David Hasselhoff was driving around in his car, Kit. It was incredible. It was voice control. You can talk with it. It had screens all over. And it could drive by itself and sensors all around. Totally science fiction, right? It even had a rocket booster. Today, you know that this is the standard specification for a Tesla if you want to buy it. Maybe not the rocket booster, but Elon Musk compensated that by sending the Tesla into space. So things happen, sometimes fast, sometimes take a little bit longer. But what we're going to use the technology for sometimes we don't really know. And I think the same goes with our industry. We're now in 5G. What are we going to use it for? Of course, we have a lot of ideas, and we've had it in the past as well. From the first G, when all you could do was call someone, and not too many, because not too many had that technology, actually. But then 2G came, and we know now everybody's going to use it for a phone and going to be more accessible to the populations. What we didn't know was that a protocol intended to control the devices became a massive hit, SMS, texting. I think you all done it, right? We didn't see that coming, actually, from our industry. Same goes with 3G. The big thing then was that everybody should have video telephony. That was the killer app. It actually took another generation before we came there, but we also learned that we could email from our laptops while being on the road by using mobile broadband. And that was kind of neat as well. Maybe we didn't see that coming as big as it became ultimately. With 4G, then we knew that we're going to have a lot of apps. No one could understand we would have a multi-billion-dollar company where we threw birds at pigs. Anecdote, by the way, do you know why it's pigs that we're going to kill with the birds? It was a pandemic, the swine flu. So the pigs was bad, right? Reflection. Anyway, now we are in 5G. And yes, we have a lot of ideas what we're going to use 5G for. Maybe some of them will happen, maybe others, I hope others will occur that we have no idea of when we started off this development. But we're talking about self-driving cars, about robotics that are moving by itself, and all these fancy things, which some of them we can already see starting to happen today. What we do know with 5G is that it's going to come in different flavors. And first of all, we have what we call critical communication. And that is probably where we relate to a lot of the 5G use cases that we hear about, the autonomous driving and all these things that are requiring really low latencies and high availability and all these things to work if it's going to be controlled by infrastructure. So this is something that we'll talk a little bit more about, or Mats and others will talk about. Then the second thing is more data, more mobile broadband. We need the capacity. That is actually rather forgotten sometimes, that one of the key drivers for operators to deploy 5G is to access more spectrum so that we can continue to grow this tremendous increase in data volumes. Very important. Then we have something that is, of course, really interesting for someone like me in IoT. That is the smart and efficient mobile massive IoT, narrowband IoT and LTM. And I have my colleague Jonas Karlsson later on stage who's going to talk more about what that means. But this is already starting to become available today. Anyhow, the road to 5G for many of you enterprises who consider this, I think, is going to pass a few different stages. And this is also something that we mentioned in a white paper we released recently. So if you don't think I go deep enough, don't hesitate to download that one. But the first phase, where we probably are right now, is what we call the transition phase, where 5G coverage is starting to pop up. I'm going to go through this a little bit more on the coming slides, what it means to us. But second phase, evolve, that's when we actually start to see sufficient coverage to do really good things on a global scale with 5G. And finally, the transformation phase, that's when we have everything in place, 5G is available, and everything like that. You can count on it. But starting then with the transition phase, what to consider here. That's really where we are right now, I would say. 5G networks are starting to pop up on certain geographies in the world. You probably cannot rely on it being everywhere if you have a global application, but maybe regionally or on a certain location, you can start to build on it. But from a global perspective, which is often the use case of our customers, they want to connect their things on more than one market, sometimes 180 markets simultaneously. We're probably more into starting to think ahead now and maybe look upon your installed hardware. If you start to do a new generation of your connected device, should I include 5G connectivity maybe so that I'm prepared for it once it becomes available? And maybe even more so, since we are in this transition also shutting off 2G and 3G on many markets, or starting to plan for it at least. How do I manage that transition from legacy networks into 5G? And for sure, a lot of 2G is still being used heavily, actually, in IoT applications out today. So start to think ahead and have a long-term planning whenever you do changes or new applications with IoT today. Then we reach the evolve phase, and maybe this is when the fun starts to happen. This is where we have sufficient coverage of 5G around the world so that we can actually start to use it for meaningful applications and capture the benefits of it. So I think once we get in here, then it's more about making sure that you have the right competence, or maybe you have to spend some business development hours to not lag behind competition in terms of developing new services and really taking advantage of all the critical communication capabilities and all this that 5G comes with. Yeah, I think this is where it all happens, where it starts to happen at least. Until we then come into the full transform. This is where probably a few years ahead of us, just to put some expectation, when you can expect to have 5G networks available wherever you are in the world, at least the developed world, and really count on it. But at this point, I expect to have a full-fledged ecosystem. There will be a lot of partners and players and technology available to really reap the benefits of the 5G networks. And Mats from Ericsson is coming up on stage pretty soon and talking about network slicing, for instance, which is one of the concepts that you can really start to use. But as always, we believe in Telenor that the business should be in focus here. So yes, this is a lot of new technology and fancy stuff that you can do cool things with. But unless you have a clear business idea of what you're going to use it for, you're probably going to end up in some kind of technology project that's going to be put in a box somewhere once you're done with it. It might have been a fun ride, but not lead to a lot of business. So really start to think about the business value you can realize with this technology. That's always a good start. And then technology will usually follow, and we will realize what to do with it over time. But what I think is interesting is that, yes, we have talked about autonomous driving, and we have talked about the robotics and all these fancy things, but I'm sure that some of you out there already now sit with maybe the seed of an idea that will fill our 5G networks over time. And time is important, and planning ahead is important, and maybe some of you think now, well, what about 5G? We're about to have to transition from legacy networks now. That's cumbersome. Yes, it is, but actually, 2G has been around for 30 years or something, and we're still using it for IoT, and many markets are going to continue to use it for a while. Same goes with 5G. This is maybe a bigger transition now, since we're starting to shut off the 2G networks in some locations. But 5G will be around. 4G will be around for a long time. I count on it to be around for 30 years at least. So rest assured, you have time to develop those fancy business ideas of yours. So with that, leaving it, I thought, yes, leaving it with a question. What's your 5G use case? I think we are now in the transition phase to start to think about this, and you will be well prepared for the future. One who has started to think about this is Mats and Ericsson in general. So I leave the scene to you to talk about network slicing in 5G.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you. Okay. Welcome, everyone. My name is Mats Johansson. I work in solution marketing here in Ericsson headquarters in Kista, Stockholm. I've been working a long time in Ericsson, and the last years I've been working a lot with 5G since we launched it. We launched 5G in Ericsson 2017, actually. But of course, it started from 2018 and onwards. And it's really interesting also to reflect a little bit on what Martin said with the Gs. And I've been a long time, I've been working with all the Gs. And IoT is not such a new business either. Many of you have been in that business already for several years. I had my first smart meters in my house in 2007, I think. And of course, it's still, I think it still runs on 2G, potentially. So, but I think what we in the industry didn't plan for IoT. We built the networks for consumers up until 4G, basically. 4G was just faster 3G, which enabled, of course, YouTube video on the mobile and all the smartphone apps. But 5G, the vision with 5G was slightly different, because the vision with 5G was to build something for IoT, to have one network for all services. And of course, it wasn't feasible for all of these different IoT applications to build their own networks. And if we look at the emergency services, the first responders type of services, I mean, they still use Tetra in many countries, which is has certain features that they need, but it's still old-fashioned, and it doesn't have data capability you're looking for, etc. And it's expensive for them to continue to develop it. Even military organizations in many countries can't afford to build their own. So this is really why 5G was different. And one thing, a feature that will make it different, is something called network slicing. And we have talked about it for a long time. I'm sure, how many of you have heard about network slicing? Yes, you've all heard about it. And do you know why it's different and how it works? Hand up. Well, not so many, but anyway, I'll touch upon that quickly. I will not make this into a long technology talk, but the idea here is that in today's network, we have basically a best effort network. Everyone uses the same capacity, and you get what you get. The thinking around slicing is that when you have virtualized a lot of the functions in the network, it's possible to build virtual instances of the network, such that you can secure that this type of application, whether it's the self-driving car we saw out there, or whether it's the mining machines driven remotely, they could reserve and get access to a virtual space of the entire network. A certain portion of the radio network, certain portions of the functions in the core network. And you could also have dedicated functions. For instance, if you run a video service, you want to make sure that you maybe have video optimization. So you would connect those type of functions in the core network to that slice. So you would have different types of slices for different types of requirements. So some of these slices could be for sensors, which have a little data that uses less resources, but will for sure get what they need, and you pay only for that. whereas some of the more elephant flows where you have huge amounts of data for a short time, for a high definition 8K video or something like that, you will be able to get that. So that's the idea behind slicing. And eventually you will also be able to come to the stage where you, as an enterprise, you will not worry about whether it's sliced or not. It's a 5G network. But potentially you could have portals or self-serve portals where you would go in and reserve capacity, buy services for surveillance or whatever, and transmission for that, and that will be taken care of. And make sure that it fulfills your requirements. Another thing that's been discussed a lot is whether you have network slicing covering an area, or if you have a private network of 5G on your premises. And of course, you all have a private network of some sort. You're using LAN cables, everybody has Wi-Fi of some sort, and you use it also for a lot of your applications, of course. And this will continue. Wi-Fi will not go away. LAN fiber connections will not go away. In fact, we estimate that around, when we talk about network slicing that I talked about, around 25% of the use cases that we see in 5G will need slicing to be able to work sufficiently well. So a lot of the applications will work fine on just regular, let's say, 5G, which is basically faster 4G, and with lower latencies. But it's still a best effort. And things will continue to work for a very long time on 4G as well, and have 4G as a fallback. But I think that we have to distinguish, of course, the difference here that if you have a network on-prem, it's a bigger investment for sure. On the other hand, you are then very much in control of exactly what's happening, and you can also make sure that data stays on your premises if that's important. But you could also have a hybrid solution where you would use some functions would go where you have a slice covering your premises, and that will also work fine. And then you could have certain applications to run locally. So and we see that in research that we have done, something around 50% of the enterprises that we've asked have said that around 50% think they will go for some kind of hybrid solution. And of course, the main benefit with the slice here is, of course, the lower cost, but then you can cover more wide area networks. And this is, of course, when it comes to the connected cars. And I think later on we will have a presentation about the connected lawn movers. Of course, you need a wide area coverage for that. Then it's whether you need slicing or not, it's not for me to judge or decide here. But for sure, depending on the type of use case, will determine what type of network you need or may not need. Now, we have looked at some of the industries that we think will use this type of technology and also where slicing can come in. And the biggest are, I think, healthcare, manufacturing, transportation, government services like smart cities, surveillance and monitoring solutions will be among those. Also in retail, where you have all these connected cash points, etc., where you need short latencies. Some of these, to the right here in the slide, you see a group of, some of these use cases will be similar regardless of industry. Surveillance, monitoring, real-time automation will be used in several different industries and may not be so specific to that industry. And what we need to consider here is also, as we progress with 5G, and I think Martin had an interesting speech about the evolution. It is an evolutionary journey, and it goes in many aspects. It's a technology evolution where we're building more and more features onto 5G. It's also a commercial readiness. Are we ready to offer this? Are people prepared to buy? How will they buy these types of services? Will they buy a slice on a SIM, which you put in devices? Or will it be more that you reserve capacity for a period of time for certain events? And how will you sell and package these things? And it's also an operational question for the operators. How will they operate the network now that everything becomes a bit more complex and end-to-end slicing? And eventually we need to make sure that this also works in the roaming scenario, which is something that will come and is being standardized as well. And I think what I said here is, if we look at, these are like the 6 biggest industries where we think that we will have the most of the use cases in those 6 industries. And you could think some of these use cases we believe will be earlier than others. I mean, for instance, one example could be in the media space, we have remote broadcast and production, where production companies like Sveriges Television or BBC, they will have, instead of OB buses and satellite links from live events, they will use 5G and have the production sit centrally where the tools are in the cloud. And this is a trend that we see coming, and it's a good case for the broadcasters, because that makes this thing more cheap for them, and they can cover more and smaller events. And we have a long tail of enterprises producing video. We have video bloggers, etc. So it will enable and facilitate much more. And this is something that we can do fairly quickly. There are already trials ongoing. So I think commercially this will happen quite soon. Other examples, and you saw this out there, was the automotive space, and you saw the connected lorry, and where things like teleoperated driving, etc., will be good use cases. And a lot of the reason for this is, of course, we are looking for this high flexibility of different requirements that could change from industry to industry. We can ensure the high quality of service with low latency, high bandwidth if needed. And also, not to forget it, the traffic isolation, that the slices in 5G enables to isolate the traffic such that data remains safe within that. And it's also becoming more, so there are more security features implemented in 5G to make sure that if we have a problem in one portion of the network, that will not propagate to everything else. So you can sort of rest assured that my slice, my connection is my own and not jeopardized by someone else's. And I think these types of features will be similar if we go to, let's say, energy generation, surveillance of wind power plants, control of power stations, or grid voltage monitoring, connected light, anything that I think you already have a lot of things in 4G where it might be solar panel that powers whether it's places where you can pay for something or locally, etc. All of these types of things that doesn't necessarily have a fixed connection already are prone to this type of setup, and where you have high requirements that you cannot satisfy easily today. Supply chain is another area that we have looked into, and it's the same thing there. You have, in this case, scalability is important as well. And this is something that could be facilitated in 5G quite easily too. So there are a lot of things that we have thought about in 5G that will make a difference compared to other generations. So we're just waiting for, once we get this platform in place and it will continue to evolve, innovation will come. Just like we saw when we had 4G there, the iPhone came around, the applications, the app stores, and all of that just exploded. And with 5G, I'm sure we will have the same type of development. So with that, I'll end here and invite you, I think, for questions.
Thank you, Mats and Martin. What a relief. There is a substantial use cases behind the hype, right?
It is.
Yeah.
Yes.
Before I'm asking the audience for any questions, I start with you, Martin. Yeah. Okay, with deployment of 5G comes also sunsetting 2G and 3G. How can we support our customers in order to make the transition smooth?
Yeah, it's a great question, of course, and something we look into deeply now. And with some customers already have quite deep engagements, actually, because the sunsetting of 2G and 3G will happen very differently depending on which market you look at. It's only happening in some geographies, US being one of the key markets, big market, where the final 2G network is about to be shut off now any month, I would say, but at least sometime during next year. So, of course, you need to be prepared for that. As Telenor IoT, we can help out by, first of all, having a good relationship with our roaming partners and network owners around the world and trying to gather as much data as possible about their plans. Looking at geographies, we can also use some of our analytics tool to see if any of our customers have a correlation of a large fleet of installed devices that are only 2G capable on markets where we see that there's sunset plans up ahead and so on. But this is going to be painful to some extent. And of course, some customers will have to go out and maybe replace the modems on very old equipment that have been standing there for a long time, or replace the device itself. But it's also required, I would say, for many reasons, and releasing the spectrum of 2G to more modern and efficient technologies to actually allow for this new innovation.
Thank you, Martin. And Mats, super interesting to hear about network slicing and, of course, private networks enabling efficient productions. What is needed to make this really happening on the market? What is needed to give it a market push, so to say?
Yeah, good question. I think what's important here is for the players to be aware of where this might go, and with the players, I mean players like yourself, of course, to make sure that you have automation in place to make sure to facilitate this, and also that you deepen perhaps relations to understand the pain points of your customers. I think for enterprises it's important to realize that these are, let's say, enablers that may come. How could I make use of this? What are the things I could change or take more advantage of going forward, and start to prepare and plan for that? That's gonna come in some few years.
Thank you.
Thank you.